One of the worst punishments that ancient societies could inflict on their members, besides killing them outright, would be to expel them from that society. So if you did something very evil, something damaging it was damaging enough to the people in your village, your community, you would be exiled. You'd be sent away, never able to return to that village again. You had to wander by yourself in the wilderness. And for most people, it would have been a death sentence. Now, having leprosy, of course, wasn't a crime, but the punishment was almost the same as if it had been. You were declared unclean. The law of Moses, the Torah, the most holy part of the Jewish scriptures, declared that if you had a disease like that, you were not fit to be in the society anymore. You had to separate yourself. You had to warn other people so that they'd stay away from you. You had to live apart. You had to wear ragged clothes that would also warn people that you were an unclean person. And you couldn't worship in the temple. You were stigmatized. You were avoided. You were set apart. Imagine how it must have felt for someone in that time to not be able to speak to or touch their family members or their friends for the rest of their lives, for there was no cure. The leper would be set apart to watch himself grow these ugly bumps all over his body, to watch his fingers and his toes drop off. His nose would collapse. Others who would see him would recoil in horror. Imagine how that must have felt. Imagine the despair that these people would fall into, convinced that they were unloved and unlovable. And even worse, the culture of that time thought that if you had a disease like that, you had committed some terrible sin and God had punished you. And so the leper would have thought that God didn't love him either. And the proof was that he was not worthy enough to worship in the temple any longer. He might as well be dead. But Jesus brings the good news in the gospel today. The good news of God's unchanging love and compassion and mercy and forgiveness and healing. I'm sure Jesus had seen many lepers from a distance, but now today one who is unusually courageous and perhaps unusually desperate came to him. And maybe that leper had also seen Jesus at a distance healing people, and he wondered, could it be possible for me to be healed? Perhaps he was fearful and trembling as he approached Jesus. His voice was probably hesitant. If you will, Lord, could you make me clean? And Jesus is touched and moved. The man must have looked pitiable, but Jesus is moved by the pain that he suffered. Of course I will it. And I'm sure he had a big smile on his face as he touched this leper, this untouchable person. Be made clean. Jesus is not afraid of becoming unclean himself, for Jesus knew well that it wasn't what came from outside that made a person unclean, as he says in another place in the gospel. So what comes from within you. So Jesus had no fear. And not only does Jesus heal him physically, but he heals him spiritually. He heals him in a society, because now this person goes to the priest, does the ritual sacrifice that's prescribed, and now he can return to the temple, return to his family. He's healed totally. And now consider this. All of us, every one of us, is a leper. We're all disfigured in some way by the sins that we've committed, both omission and commission. The difference is you couldn't detect our leprosy by looking at us. We spend a lot of time and energy on looking good for the world. We want to belong, as every person does. We want to be acceptable. But on the inside, we've all got a form of leprosy. And it's a kind of leprosy that can't be fixed with makeup or pills or plastic surgery. It can only be fixed by Jesus. And once again, the good news is that Jesus waits patiently for us, as he did for that leper today. He sees all of the imperfections. He sees all the scars and the scabs and the wounds that we try to hide, and that we do hide from everybody else. But we can't hide them from Jesus. And the good news is that Jesus doesn't turn away from us. So let's imagine for a moment what kind of leprosy you and I might have. Well, there are many forms. Maybe for many years, you've carried around the leprosy of abuse. Maybe you've been abused. Maybe you've abused somebody else. Perhaps it was many years ago. But you've never forgotten. You've never forgiven yourself. And somewhere you still think that you're unclean from that. Somehow that has separated you from others, even if it's only in your mind. Or perhaps your form of leprosy is that many years ago you failed to help someone when you could have. Maybe you made an excuse. Oh, they weren't really deserving. Or if I tried to help them, they'd reject me anyway. And so you turned away. But maybe you've always regretted that sin of omission and wondered, I wonder if I had reached out as I thought I could have, but I didn't. I wonder if I had, how things would have been different. Maybe you've got this very common form of leprosy that I think most of us have. That we're not really believing that God could love us with all the mistakes we've made, all the times we put ourselves first, all the times we've fallen into the same sinful behavior. We don't seem to be able to improve or to change ourselves. How could God love us? When we look at ourselves, we see ugliness. We see our form of leprosy. And so to ourselves, we appear unclean, incurable. But the good news is that it doesn't matter. None of that matters to Jesus. Yes, of course, he looks at us, and when we're in his glorious light, we can't hide anything. He sees all of the things that we would like to hide, all the pain and the hurt and the humiliation, all the woundedness. And it's okay. And I wonder if you don't find it freeing and maybe even joyful to know that Jesus does not turn away, would never turn away. He receives us as graciously as he did the leper in the gospel today. He knows the very worst about us, and he loves us anyway. And he also knows the best about us. All the times that we keep trying, even though we seem to fail so many times. He loves all the effort that we make. All the times that we get up once more and follow him. So maybe today, sometime today or sometime this weekend, I encourage you to take a few minutes of quiet time. Time just with you and the Lord. And imagine yourself as the leper. And imagine that you're approaching Jesus, and consider what kind of leprosy you would like to be made clean of. What is that pervasive guilt or fear or sinfulness that you want to be free of? If you will, Lord, you can make me clean. And then look at Jesus' beautiful face as he smiles at you. And you know he sees everything you've ever done, and he accepts you. And he says, of course I will. Be made clean.